There we go. Episode 78 of a Quarkus example app. That's a fun part. So we got a few people. But before we go into the thing, just a few news. We got Quarkus 2.7 coming, what did we say, this week? Right?
This week, yes. Yeah. Yes.
So that's there. We got a bunch of good developer improvements in there and a bunch of other things. And I think next week we have Stuart to talk about some of that stuff. So we'll keep that for now. And then t-shirts. So the three of us, who is me and Georgios and Clement, is in Europe. And Eric in the corner is in US. And they are privileged. So they have t-shirts. So if you're listening and you're from Europe, you have the answer that, yeah, we're still waiting. But I know they are located in an office in Europe, so we are just waiting for it to be kind of shipped out. But there's about 320 of them or something, so that's why.
Excellent.
Okay. Anyway, as always, have you been here before? I can't remember.
Yeah, I was here once with the Quarkus for Spring Developers thing.
That was true. Oh, that's not that far. Long time ago. Yeah.
It's like September-ish.
That's true. So anyway, so yeah, we kind of been here before, and the idea for everyone who's new is that any questions you have, you put it in chat, and we will give the question to Eric or whoever can answer it. The topic of today is something as exciting as an example app, but it actually is exciting. So maybe I'll give an update. You can give detail, Eric. But basically, the idea is we've had different various apps around, like to-do apps and a superhero app and a few other experiments we go out and present about. And we didn't have like one place where we kind of could collaborate and have the same kind of experience and do different scenarios. And Eric got the crazy idea to try and actually make that happen. And that's where we are now. He has something. So we thought to go through it, and I'm sure we'll get a bunch of insights and new ideas and questions. So yeah, that's what it is. So Eric, I'll give the floor to you.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Max, and thanks for having me. So I guess first off, I'll say that this wasn't my brainchild here. Like every software engineer, you beg, borrow, and steal whatever you can that someone else has already started. So the foundation for this actually came from Clement. So kind of why he's here. So that way, if something doesn't work, I can blame him, publicly.
Okay, so I have to. Yeah, but I have to tell the truth. A few years back, like 3 or 4 years back, I met with Emmanuel and Antonio Goncalves, and Antonio was organizing this course, a microservices day, and he said, "Oh, it would be great to have a one-day Quarkus workshop. Let's do it." And Emmanuel said, "Yes, let's do it." And then I was like, "Yeah, okay, but we have nothing." So and basically, we had in 1 month, even less than a month, tried to get something, and we were looking for ideas, because that's the hardest thing. It's trying to find the kind of things you will build with all the things you want to explain to the workshop attendees. So at the base, it was a workshop. It's still a workshop. It's still available. But yeah, I was not alone in this story. Emmanuel and Antonio did a lot of the things. The Angular part, that's Antonio. So don't blame me about that, please.
Yeah, so let's take a look at what it actually is here. So before I go, I'm going to talk just a couple seconds about me and who's this guy and why am I qualified to talk about it. So I've been doing software development for many years, at least 22, mostly in financial services. I spent most of my career. I work for Red Hat now. Been here, actually just hit my 3-year anniversary last week. But I've been involved in open source for quite some time. Most recently with Quarkus, I've done a bunch of stuff and a bunch of PRs. Nothing all too earth-shattering or exciting, but I have done a few things, enough to earn me this T-shirt. I don't know what your bar is set to get a T-shirt, but I did enough to get that.
It's pretty low. One commit.
if you participate, if you made a commit into a PR that made it into
between 1 and 2,
1 and 2, then you got the Make Orchestra.
Yeah, that's a huge bar.
Yeah, and but it has to be in the the core repository, not all the auxiliary ones. So then we ran out of T-shirt, I think. But,
yeah, actually, I have a bigger PR that's been lingering since like December. We can talk about that another day. But
yeah, well, that will give you a 3.0 T-shirt. So
3.0
yeah,
T-shirt.
exactly. Well, you should probably, like fix the date on that one because I'm not exactly sure how we're counting. But yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah. So, but before Quarkus, I was a contributor to a bunch of Spring stuff. So, I did some stuff with Spring security, but these were kind of in my past. I haven't done that recently. But I was a Spring committer for a little bit, and I've done some training programs, and I have actually written a book. And just shameless plug here. I did write a book. So if you're familiar with Spring, and you want to learn Quarkus from a Spring developer's perspective, there's a free download here. We just got printed copies. I don't know if you can see it with the virtual background, but hooray!
Sure.
Yeah, we get printed copies. We're going to give them out for free as we start going to events and whatnot. So go ahead, download it, give it a read. But like every other published book that you write, it's irrelevant the day it's published, right? So I'm trying to keep it up to date is the hard part. All right, so now what are we going to talk about, right? So we talked about the superheroes, so now we're going to go off to the rescue. But before the superhero can swoop in and save the day, we kind of introduce the problem. And Max, you started to allude to it earlier, where we've got all these different things that are kind of disjointed in different places. And Clement and Emmanuel and Antonio had this workshop that was laying around, and not just from the application side, but hey, I want a demo. I need an app that's more than Hello World that I want to use to demo this feature on Kubernetes, or I want to showcase how do I do microservices development. Hey, I've got this suite of microservices and I'm focused on one in the middle. How do I do that? What are some of the patterns and practices for doing that? So we didn't have, or at least from my perspective, we didn't have a good way to show that. So we needed something that was definitely real world, but wasn't the kitchen sink either, right? We can't have everything. We don't want to make up use cases for everything. We wanted to pick a set of problems or capabilities that a fair amount or percentage of developers are dealing with today. So like REST or messaging, health checks, monitoring metrics, all that kind of stuff, and stick to it while showcasing different patterns and practices. The big key here, and I think you guys have signed up for this, is to own this going forward and to keep it up to date as Quarkus evolves, right? So
you're going to help us, right? So it's good.
Yeah, I can help you. I'll help you. It's not like I'm going to throw it over the wall and wipe my hands clean of it, but that's the goal, is to keep it up to date and hopefully get it into the Quarkus CI automation so that as new versions come out, it gets tested and whatnot as part of that. So you'll get immediate feedback, and it's got a full suite of automation to go with it. So not only showing the applications, but you can show and see, how would I do GitHub Actions? How would I do automation in a microservices environment? How would I do integration testing? How would I build container images? How would I push them as part of my automation strategy? So all that stuff is there. How do I test, right? These Hello World apps that are out there, a lot of them, they kind of leave testing, under the carpet, and it's like the ugly child that nobody wants to look at. You just kind of don't talk about it. So, a full set of tests that both for integration and automation. But at the end of the day, it needs to be easy to run. Like, I shouldn't have to go into like 5 million different YAML files and change all these different things before I can actually deploy the entire system. We wanted to make it super simple, super easy, just, kubectl apply and done. And you can deploy the entire system into Kubernetes or one set of the system. You could do, one service at a time or the entire system in one shot.
And see, we have Ravi here who says he's new to Quarkus. So you all made it for him. Like a new
that's right. We had him in mind.
That's coming in and trying it out, but at the same time, be advanced enough to actually show off, like, say, real things. So
Yep. Yeah, we wanted it to be more than Hello World, and I'll show a picture, and then we'll dive into actually how to run it and stuff in a few minutes. But it needs to be quick and easy to run both in like a Kubernetes environment, but also on my local machine, right? If I'm doing development on one of these services, how do I do that effectively? Do I use Docker Compose to stand up the services? Do I run them locally? There's a bunch of different ways to do it. So we're going to show how you would do it.
I can see Antonio showing up now. He's so that's good. He's saying CI, CD, and superheroes. Nice. And what about automatic deploying to a cloud provider?
Sure.
So yeah, we definitely want to deploy to everything.
Yeah, give us credits on Azure.
That's what I was thinking.
We'll do it. Send us the credits.
I'm sure he will. For those who don't know, Antonio is at Microsoft on the Azure department. That's something I'm not sure how much you actually managed to do, Eric. We'll see soon. But yeah, this should definitely be able to deploy to OpenShift Sandbox, anything Kubernetes, even Azure and stuff. And yeah, but that's the nice thing is we can now actually have a place to document either directly in the repo or in a branch. Hey, here's how to deploy it to Azure or whatever. So that's the whole idea. So
Antonio, one of the cool things about it is having the ability to, hey, I want to tie it into Azure Kafka service or whatever, right? I need an app that I can test with that, or I want to deploy you using an Azure database, or I want to test out this new Azure capability. Now I have an app that I can play with that I don't actually have to go out and build myself. I've got a full system of apps that I can work with. At the end of the day, we want it to be fun too. Everybody can do. We've seen the to-do apps over and over and over again. We wanted something a little more fun. It is single repo, but it is not multi-module, if that makes sense. So all the apps, there's 5 apps. They're all hosted in one repo, but there's not like a top-level POM or anything that controls. They're all independent applications. We kept it in a single repo just to make it easy. From a management perspective. All right, and so this is what we came up with, and I'll show it to you live in a few minutes. But this is what we came up with. So we've got a bunch of different superheroes that you can. They show up, and then they can fight one another, and it's got a super complicated algorithm that determines who the winner is. Basically, if one superhero's level is higher than the other, he wins.
No, there is a bit of random in between. So
yeah, there is a bit of random in between. There's a bit of randomness. So if you get 2 superheroes whose levels are very close to each other, it's kind of a coin toss as to who's going to win. But I've been looking over some of the sample data, and I, for whatever reason, and I'm sure you'll see it in the demo, I get like one guy who's got like 1 million, and the other guy who's got 2, and it's kind of obvious who's going to win that. Randomness isn't going to help too much. So, and besides the main UI, there's a bunch of different, there's a statistics UI. So this comes out of a different microservice where it keeps track of the number of wins of the heroes versus the villains, as well as who kind of your top 10 winners are and how many times they've won. And then it's all backed by Prometheus. So you can stand at Prometheus, so you can watch what's going on, within any of the services. And so I don't want to spend time on screenshots because we're going to do it live. So let's kind of look at what's under the covers here, because I don't like to PowerPoint people to death on a tech talk. So under the cape, this is what the system looks like. You've got 5 different microservices. 4 of them are based on Quarkus, and one of them is Node.js and Angular, and it runs actually in a Node.js container. It used to be in an Angular app package inside Quarkus, but we moved it out just into its own Node.js container for a number of different reasons. And then each service, if you go through, wrong machine. So the hero service is fully reactive, non-blocking. It's basically a CRUD microservice. It talks to a Postgres database, uses Quarkus, the Hibernate reactive with Panache, with Rest Easy reactive at the front layer. It does implement, so this is one thing that's different from the superheroes workshop that's out there, is it does implement patch for partial updates. So, it has all the HTTP verbs, post for adding new ones, put, get, but it does do patch for partial updates. So it shows how you would integrate something like MapStruct for doing something like that. It uses the repository pattern within the persistence layer. It's got a full suite of tests using mocking, spying, isolated transactions, all that kind of stuff. And this service favors constructor injection over field injection. We can have a whole separate conversation about that. In my opinion on that, I feel that's the better way to do it. But we show it all different ways. And what's kind of cool with all of these different services is we provide out of the box as part of the automation is 4 container images are readily available in kind of permutations between Java 11, Java 17, native, and JVM. So there's 4, every time a check-in is made, there's 4 different container images that get published out to Quay for each of these services. So it's pretty easy to stand out.
So the nice thing is, because I know when we started this, I was kind of concerned about the microservice-y thing of having like multiple containers and stuff, which is still a concern. Like if you just want to get started on Quarkus, don't go here, go to the quick starts for that specific part. But this is the place for, hey, I want, like, how does it fit into a full application? That's where this goes in. But the fact that you've done this with the 4 container images means that I could just focus on one of them and say, hey, I just run with the existing ones, and then just muck around with one, which is nice.
Yep.
Which is what you would do in real life if you're trying to learn a setup anyway. So
and if you want to see an idiomatic way of building Quarkus microservices, that's where you can look at. It's not a single thing; it's really multiple things. And Eric did a great job in putting all together and giving us feedback and a lot of work for the next few releases.
I've got a very serious question. Is any of this in Gradle?
We didn't do any Gradle, and I'm sad to say that.
How about Kotlin?
There's no Kotlin.
Oh man.
Well, so
we're not hip.
Initially, it was Antonio, Emmanuel, and myself. So we are definitely Maven guy and Java guys. So that's it.
How are we going to capture the hipster crowd?
Yeah, personally, I'm a Gradle guy, and I prefer it over Maven any day. But I took, like I said, I begged, borrowed, and stole whatever I could to get this off the ground. And feel free, Georgios, it's out there now. PRs are welcome. You're always telling everybody else that, right?
Yeah, because I have so much free time that I'm going to go and open PRs for Kotlin and Gradle.
Yeah. So Safari, I hope I pronounced your right name correctly, is asking, what do you mean by the front-end UI Node.js? Do you mean Angular for UI backed by Node.js?
Yeah, it's just a Node.js container that's serving static content, and that static content is Angular. And it's pre-compiled and whatnot.
Yeah. And are you going to get into why that later? Or you want to cover that now? Or
I could. Let me get. We can talk about it because I have a slide specific to that app. We'll talk about it there. So the villain service is pretty much identical to the hero service, other than it's villains instead of heroes. But the main differences are, instead of Hibernate reactive, it's just plain Hibernate. It's not a reactive app. It's an imperative app, but still uses REST easy reactive, but they're all blocking endpoints. So this one is fully blocking. So if someone's looking for, hey, what does it look like for blocking versus reactive, you can kind of take those two services and look at them side by side, and they pretty much implement the exact same use cases, just in different flavors. It still does use REST easy reactive under the covers, but it is fully blocking. This app does use some custom, so it shows how to use like config mappings and whatnot. So it brings in some custom configuration. It, like when you create new villains, it adds some randomness to the levels just for fun to show. It also, this app favors field injection over constructor injection. So it shows like @inject and field level injection in all the beans and stuff. And again, same matrix of container images are available.
Oh, nice.
All right, the fight service. So the fight service is fully reactive, non-blocking. This is what the UI communicates with. So the Angular UI in the browser, talks to this service through REST. Fight information, as previous fights have happened, gets stored in Postgres. It uses Hibernate reactive with Panache, uses the active record pattern. It has some config mapping as well, and it makes HTTP calls to the heroes and the villain service. So this service showcases how would I do things like how would I use the reactive REST client, and I built it in 2 different ways. So one, I forget. I think the calls to the hero service use like the interface space, and I'll show this in the code in a second, but use like the reactive REST client with the interfaces. But the calls to the hero service use the out of the box JAX-RS client using the REST easy reactive pipelining. So just to kind of show how you would do either one. And all of them are protected with resilience patterns. So like retry, timeout, fallback, circuit breaking, all that kind of stuff. It also emits the fight information as every fight occurs to Kafka, so that something else downstream that's interested in those events can listen to it. And we've got a bunch of different enhancements that we've got in the backlog that we want to implement here, like Avro or schema registries and all that kind of stuff. But that's not in there at the moment. It shows how to do testing. So it uses WireMock pretty heavily for doing the downstream testing between all the different services. So if you're interested in, hey, how would I stub out my backend services to write tests? This app shows how to do that, as well as how would you swap and use the in-memory connector when you're running unit tests, so it doesn't need an actual Kafka broker. The integration tests actually will use dev services to stand up a Kafka broker, but the unit tests do not. And this one favors constructor injection over field injection. And again, same for container images. And then the stat service listens for message. So this one is completely event driven, and it exposes events over WebSocket. So it has its own jQuery UI that's embedded into the app, and it connects over WebSockets back into the app itself. So every time it receives an event, a fight event from Kafka, it keeps track of the top 10 winners and the number of wins for each, and it maintains the kind of the percentage of the number of times that the heroes have won over the villains. It does some testing, so it uses Kafka producers, and it shows how would I do tests of my WebSocket layer. And it kind of mixes constructor and field injection for really no rhyme. If you were to ask me, why does this bean use field injection? Why does that one use constructor? I don't know. It's just kind of the mood I was in at the day that I did it. No real reason as to why or why not.
But basically getting to the world's most complicated coin flip. That's what this does in all different ways.
Yeah, well, this one is just gathering statistics. So you can run the entire system.
This is the counting aspect of it, so sure.
Yeah.
We got Christoph. He always has all the good questions here. Does the service also demo reactive REST client calls using a proxy server, NLTM in the worst case? I don't think there's a proxy server, but do you have a REST client in there? Do you use it?
Yeah, it uses the REST client, the reactive REST, the REST easy REST client.
Yeah. And then a proxy server, yeah.
I don't believe we do. Well, the demo does not have this. We are improving the support of proxies. There is still a bit of work to do. NTLM, I'm not sure we test for that case. We do test with Kerberos. But NTLM, I don't believe we do any test with that. But we should definitely have a look at. As a proxy should work if you get the authentication and the negotiate protocol flow working.
Yeah. But that's the correct thing. That would be an obvious place to actually add a little piece in this how to use proxies, because that's a typical use case.
Yeah, and in general, there's no one thing that's on the backlog is authn and authz, like authentication and authorization into this. Right now, there isn't any, but that's definitely something that we need to add in.
Yeah.
Nice. Another one that we don't have an issue to, but the switch to TLS, because right now it uses plain text everywhere. And using TLS and MTLS is going to be a big thing, because that's what you should do today.
Yep. So then someone had asked about Node.js. So the superhero UI is an Angular SPA app deployed via Node.js. So it runs a Node.js container that serves the static content, and it communicates over REST. This one just has a single container image. That was one reason why I decided to do this, is just a single container image. If I want to run the UI, I shouldn't have to pick a Java version, right? If it's in an Angular app, which is what I'd have to do if I wanted to follow the same pattern and package it within Quarkus. Plus, it just, when you started getting into the Maven tooling to build Node.js containers, with the front end plugin or whatever, it just, I'm not a UI guy whatsoever. So making this as easy as possible for me was kind of the end goal, because it's almost like I don't if you were to go through this code, there's probably stuff, if you're an Angular person, that you're probably like, well, why did they do it this way? Why did they do it this way? This app to me is purely a means to an end, right? It's the front end. I'm more focused on the Quarkus apps of this, and I didn't really spend a whole lot of time other than to really get it to work.
And now we have and that's a great thing with, like, again, a lot of people will be using like Node.js or some container separate for their UI, so that's good. That's what the typical people are doing. But also nice thing is that, like, we had last week, we had Steph with his Renard having a nice web UI and using WebGR as a package, which is, again, a nice way of doing it. And I could definitely see us making a variation of the superhero UI that does that. But that's a nice thing. We can add and remove as people have time to do. So
yeah, one thing that I did add, and actually I didn't do it on my own, I got some help from Evan Shortus to do this, is we added in Express.js and a way to inject configuration through environment, so that I can change. So like if I wanted, depending on how I'm deploying it, I can change. Like on raw Kubernetes, if you're just using ingresses, I can use the same host and do path, context path to find the REST service or the fight service. But if I'm deploying to OpenShift and everything has roots, I can inject the root or the URL of the fight service at runtime into the container. I don't have to pre-bake the URLs into the container. So that's one thing that we did. And it's fully documented when I get to the documentation how to do that.
So right.
All right, coming soon. So we talked a little bit about, authentication, authorization, persistence. So the event service right now stores everything in memory, and it can handle like 1 million events per second. But if the service goes down and then comes back up because it's a single container, then your data is gone, right? Because it doesn't use any kind of persistence. So, using Infinispan for that is something we want to do. Adding in distributed tracing. And I started to play with like OpenTelemetry with this, and I just ran out of time and didn't have a whole lot of time to pursue it. So I wanted to get it out the door. And then, like I said, schema registry, like for the producer and consumer around Kafka, either Avro or Protobuf or something, some kind of schema registry. And then adding some, once you get the tracing out, Grafana dashboards, because everything in Prometheus is there now, and it's gathering the metrics for everything, and then making a way to nicely and easily visualize this.
Nice.
And that's it for slides. So let's go and actually show what this thing can do here. So I'm going to apologize up front. I'm actually running the demo I've got 2 different machines here because my work computer is falling to pieces. So I stole my kid's MacBook Air. So I'm working on like a little 13-inch screen, but it is an M1 and this thing screams. So the first thing I'm going to do, actually, maybe I'll show the GitHub repo. So there's like I said, it's a single repo. It's in the Quarkus.io org. Do I need to make the screen bigger? Is that okay for folks?
A little bit bigger.
A little bit bigger. So every one of the apps are here. So there's the event statistics, the 3 REST services, and then the UI app. There's some scripts that happen during the automation stage, images. But the cool thing here, and I have this like little neat plugin that I discovered the other day for visually browsing GitHub repos. So at the top level, there's this deploy directory, and in here there's a Kubernetes directory, and there's different descriptors for basically every flavor of Kubernetes for every version of Java. So there's Java 11. If I want to deploy the apps as serverless apps over Knative, the descriptors are already there. All I have to do is kubectl apply, and it'll stand up the entire system. Kafka, databases, everything, every single app, all the monitoring. I kept Prometheus separate because some people, you may not want to deploy that with the apps. So if you want to deploy Prometheus, there's different descriptors for Prometheus as well. But like for Java 17, Java 11, then native. And when I say native Java 11, that's built with Mandrill on OpenJDK 11. And native Java 17 is Mandrill Java 17. So it reflects what version of Mandrill built the native images. But then there's a Knative descriptor. There's one for just Kubernetes. There's one for Minikube. And there's one for OpenShift. And most of this is generated at build time by the appropriate Quarkus extension for these. So as part of the CI/CD automation, all these descriptors are for each individual app are generated, and then there's some scripts that go through every app and combine them into one kind of Uber YAML file, so that you can deploy the entire system with a single YAML file. So similarly, we do the same thing with Docker Compose. So if you wanted to stand up and run the system locally through Docker Compose, I could do that. I can run the entire system through one Compose file, or I can run individual apps through their individual Compose files. And so this is interesting. If I'm working on the Fight service, which has 2 downstream dependencies, I could just use Docker Compose locally to stand up those 2 services, pull their images while I run the Fight service in dev mode, for example, and do my local development. Or I could deploy everything, which I'm going to show in a minute, deploy everything to Kubernetes and then use like remote dev, right? So now I don't even have to have Docker locally on my machine. I could have the entire system out running somewhere, and then through remote dev, do my development of one of the services if I wanted to.
So people, I know people ask, my brain doesn't. Does it work with Podman Compose, or have you tried that yet?
So I'm running it on a Mac, so the Podman experience on a Mac, I can run the individual services in dev mode on Podman, but Podman with Docker Compose on a Mac with volumes doesn't work real well.
Got it.
So unfortunately, I can't on Linux. I don't know. I don't have a Linux box. If someone wants to try it out and let me know.
Basically, there's nothing preventing it from doing it. It's just trying it, setting up, and I know that that'll be one, because we actually, one of the things we're working at the moment is actually to make the experience for Podman more better on Mac and Windows, and volume mount would make it a bit more tricky. What do you need a volume for the
so the Docker Compose, like if I wanted to run one of them, it uses, so like for Postgres, for initializing the databases, so I have like all the database initialization and dumping some of the sample data. So there's actually another branch of this. So there's a so the main branch has the main code, but then there's a character data branch which has there's like 10,000 different superhero character data, heroes and villains. And so the complete set of data is in that branch, and as well as all the images. So we're serving them right out of GitHub. But for the apps themselves, I think like trying to initialize 10,000 data in dev services just wouldn't be a good experience. So I wrote a script which just randomly took like 100 of each, and that's what's being used here in the repo. But the initialization of the databases, because when you're running in dev services and dev mode is great for doing local development, but in reality, once that gets out of your development environment into a real environment, the database is usually already there, right? And either you're doing something with Flyway or Liquidbase or whatnot, or someone else is managing the schema and the data for you. So that's how if you were to look at the properties files, like the prod profile is configured to point to another database, and it's not using like drop and create and import that SQL and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So the Docker Compose will actually, so all the scripts to stand up the database and create the schema and whatnot is here, and it's kind of munged together. So when you run the entire system, there are 3 apps that use a Postgres database. It doesn't stand up 3 separate Postgres containers. It just stands up one with 3 separate schemas. Right. But when if you were to deploy it to Kubernetes, there's actually each microservice has its own database, and there are 3 separate databases.
I see Antonio's. I'm not sure what you're asking, because we could have Silver's and Workshop under, and he puts Azure in. I'm not sure he's Antonio. Can you add a bit more context to your comment, except adding Azure? And then Aaron says, which is important here about Podman Compose does submit things differently than Docker Compose for multi-server deployments. That is true, and that's actually not. That is one way, but it's also Podman also has a pure Docker API now. So technically, you should be able to use Docker Compose with it, assuming you don't use fancy stuff.
And assuming you're not on a Mac or Windows, right?
Yeah, but those are things that are being removed. So it'll be interesting to see in 2022 which kind of variations we will have. But that's what I like with this. We literally have a real, real complicated, simple, but complicated enough to try all these different combinations. So that's very good.
Yeah. So, and then for example, one thing I didn't want to run into, once you start talking about Kubernetes and you're standing up like infrastructure, things like Postgres or Kafka or whatnot, there's a million different ways to do it. And the preferred way to do it in production is to use some kind of operator, right? Whether it's Strimzy or whatever your flavor of Kafka, if you're doing crunchy data for Postgres or whatever, is to use operators. Well, that inherently lies a problem for something like this, because I want it to be stupid simple and quick and easy. Just apply a single YAML, which can't make any assumptions about A, what's already there in the cluster, or B, what permissions you have on that cluster, right? I can't go and start deploying operators because you need cluster admin for that. And I don't want to assume that there's some operator already there. So what I decided to do for this is I'm just rolling, using images out of the box. So like, for example, the database, I'm just using the upstream Postgres database and just wrapping it in a service. Where's my Kafka here? So for Kafka, I'm using, where is it here? So I'm just using the Strimzy container, and I'm using the Zookeeper list. So with starting with Kafka 2.8, it uses the craft protocol instead of Zookeeper, or you can use the craft protocol. So it's kind of one less container that's out there. So I'm actually standing up a single node or single pod Kafka instance using the Strimzy container and deploying that. So, but the documentation that's in here is very clear that, hey, this is not a production ready Kafka cluster. You should use like one of the managed services that are out there, like on cloud.redhat.com or something else, install AMQ streams operator or the Strimzy operator and stand up your infrastructure in a different way. This is just like a really easy way in a single command to deploy the entire system so that you can work on it as a developer.
Got it.
All right.
And I see Antonio came back saying that he says he noticed there's two repos. There's the Quarkus Superheroes and Quarkus Workshop Superheroes Simple. And that's why he talked about racing. What's the I don't even know what the difference is between these two.
So basically, we still have the workshop. The workshop
that's one,
develop implements that system, but a lot simpler. So we don't do everything. We do it step by step to cover a maximum of things. It's already very long. So if you want to do the workshop, it's at least 6 hours, I believe. So yeah, it's a lot. Here with Eric, we just have another repository that shows the pragmatic way of doing it with everything. Later, so we will have to backport some part of Eric's version to the workshop to show how things need to should be done completely. But yeah, that has not been done yet. Editing the workshop takes time.
Yeah, and there's some differences too, like just in that I kind of did it on purpose. So like the backend REST services for heroes and villains, I think in the workshop, if you ask for like a specific hero by ID or villain by ID, it returns 200 with an empty. I changed that to return a 404 because I wanted to show in the fight service how would I actually use the REST API, the reactive REST API to handle that. And I don't want it to be part of my circuit breaker, because it's not an error condition. It's the fact that something that I asked for something doesn't exist isn't an error condition. It's something that it shouldn't trigger the circuit breaker to happen. So I implemented it that way to show how that works. And I can show the code in a second. So I'm running the entire system here now through dev mode. I've got 4 dev mode services and I've got the Node.js service up. So I can just go like localhost 8080 and get some fighters. And then I'm going to bring up the stats UI. Oops. Finger it. And then, they've got different power seats. Like you said, there is some randomness in who wins, but when this person has this and this person has that, it's pretty much a given, right? If I can cycle through the fighters. So like I said, we narrowed it down to 100. There's only 100 of each just to make it start up fast. But if you want a full data set, you could go, there's like 10,000. You could load the entire data set in your app here. And then as I fight, it keeps track of your previous fights on this app, and then this app it shows, and you see it goes over in real time, and it shows you who the winners are. So that's kind of cool. But not everybody has the horsepower. And my other Mac that's over here doesn't have the horsepower to do this. I can't run Restream plus Docker plus IntelliJ plus 5 apps plus Node. I don't have the horsepower. My kid's MacBook Air here seems to have it. So
not jealous at all. So good. Yeah.
Yeah. And you see how fast it started too. I mean, this thing started in like 6 seconds and I'm running like 5 apps here.
Yeah.
Right.
Nice.
So, but what if I wanted to run the entire system? Like, say I'm not a developer, I want to run the system so I can showcase something else. Like, I want to show off how Prometheus works, right? So I could run the entire system through Docker Compose, Compose-F. I'm going to run the native Java 17 version, and I'm going to run, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. I'm going to run Prometheus. I want it to run Prometheus as well. And there's a script here. So when you're running it locally, I can do, that'll actually just watch the services and it'll tell you when they're all up. Because with Docker Compose, you can tell it that, hey, this depends on this, but you can't control which one starts up first unless you write your own. There's some ways to do it where you can, there's like a wrapping script that, kind of watches on ports and whatnot, but you really, so now everything is up. So it basically pings them all every 2 seconds and tries to hit the live endpoints. So now the UI is up, the events are up, and Prometheus is up. And this is all just running through Docker Compose. So as I start to run some fights, I can do the same thing. Do another fight here. New fighters, do some fights. I don't know why. Here it comes. And now I've got Prometheus up, so I can start looking at whatever I want to look at here. Pretty much anything that gets exposed, I can. I'm just picking random stuff with no rhyme or reason as to why I'm picking what I picked. And it's got a whole bunch of, you can see the metrics, or I could do it as a graph, right?
Nice.
Over 5 minutes. And everything is labeled and whatnot. So when it deployed to Kubernetes, one thing I was playing with, I actually submitted a ticket to Prometheus, but they came back and said, well, it's already been implemented, just hasn't been released yet. With Prometheus configuration, there's a way you can tell it to just automatically scrape based on labels and pod labels and whatnot in Kubernetes. But there's no way, it's either, the way the configuration works is it either scrapes the entire cluster, right? Not just the current namespace, the entire cluster, or specific labels, or no, it was either the entire cluster or namespaces. You have to manually statically define the names of the namespaces to scrape. And coming back to how this is organized, I can't with this, I can't assume what the names of any namespaces are, right? So as part of the Prometheus configuration is I manually define all the different services in the Prometheus configuration as static scrape configs. Maybe it helps if I bring it up here, right? Let me find it. Monitoring. Right. So I have to manually define the different scrape configs. The hero service, the villain service, where to go, and whatnot. But once the issue that I submitted was, well, wouldn't it be nice in the Prometheus configuration, because it has a way to tell Kubernetes or to scrape directly from Kubernetes, is just use the current namespace. And there's currently no way in the configuration to do that. But they said it's been added already, it just hasn't been released. So as soon as that's released, I'll update this so that it'll just say, just scrape all the things that have this particular label in the current namespace. And then all this static configuration will go away.
Cool.
So that's kind of cool. So now I'm running the system locally. So let's stop that. Oops, on top of I did Control C, right? So let's stop there. So I do have an OpenShift cluster. So this is the dev sandbox. So this is a free OpenShift environment on developers.redhat.com. You don't have to pay for it. There's no credit card. I just use it because it's easier than running Minikube, which I can't run on my other laptop in addition to all this stuff. But I could run Minikube locally with all these services, and it wouldn't be a problem because this thing screams. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually deploy, which I'll use kubectl apply -f, and then I'll do into the deploy directory. Remember I said that I've got like such limited real estate here on this tiny screen. In the main deploy directory is the entire system, right? If I want to deploy the entire system, but in each app, there's also a deploy directory, both with Docker Compose and Kubernetes, which just has the stuff you would need to deploy that service. So if I just wanted to deploy the stat service, here's all the different descriptors or Docker Compose to deploy just this service. if I wanted to deploy, so say I wanted to work on the fight service, which has 2 downstream dependencies, I could run, if I wanted to deploy it in all of its downstream dependencies, there's a separate descriptor in there just for that as well. So I could deploy fights, heroes, and villains, but not stats and the UI in a single apply, right? So deploy.
So for this flexibility, you're using the cube deploy, the cubes, apply.
Yep.
But not our Quarkus OpenShift extensions or community extensions.
Well, so it's the OpenShift and Kubernetes extensions that actually generated these descriptors. I just have, as part of the GitHub action, it munges them all together into a single top level for the entire system. And so the container images were already built by those extensions. The deployment descriptors were already generated by those extensions, which are present in the apps here.
Got it.
I have a 17. So I'll do.
So if you go and change the app, these YAML can be more or less updated.
Yeah.
Automatically.
Yeah. So if you were to like go in and do like change, to say I'm working on one of these systems, I could go and rerun the Maven goal that regenerates those descriptors.
Got it.
And they would just live just like you were doing local development in like the target Kubernetes directory, and you could deploy them and whatnot or whatever you want. It's
yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm going to apply this.
Yeah, that's really nice, Eric, because that's one of the things. Like we have the people are like I tend to see people in 2 camps. One are I like the kubectl apply. I have the full control thing, but then you have to update them by hand. Or another end of I want to do everything with the Maven plugins, but then you get stuck when you want to put it to some CI system.
So let me show you something.
That's
kind of where I'm going with this. So here, the entire system is up. I'm trying to make this bigger. Let me get I'm trying to make it bigger, but keep it all on the same screen at the same time here. Move some things around. All right, and then I can. There, how's that? Is that better?
Yeah, we see it.
So now I've got roots to the app here. I've got some fighters, and so I'm basically running the entire system. But what I didn't deploy was Prometheus, so I could deploy Prometheus too if I wanted to. But then I've got the stats app is here. Make that a little bigger. But what's kind of neat here is if I wanted some, so now it's all working and it's out on OpenShift. So say I'm working on the fights app, which is kind of in the middle. It has all these different downstream dependencies, right? I could come over here back to my IDE, right? Let me make that smaller. So I could go into the properties for the fights app, right? And there's a bunch of Kubernetes stuff here. Right now it builds through Docker. I could add, and I've kind of like every good cooking show, I've kind of already done something ahead of time rather than wait. But I could, if I want to use something like remote dev, for instance, I could add in all these different properties, give it all my URLs. I'm using OpenJDK 17, and then configure it to the database because the database is already deployed and the credentials for the database are already there in a secret. So I can just wire up some environment variables, and I could run and actually do. Let me go back to fights. I could say this bigger. I could say, hey, actually deploy this to Kubernetes. The system is already up and running, but now I'm using the OpenShift extension to rebuild the app and do a binary build. So Maven is doing and building the mutable jar, which the OpenShift extension is going to deploy to my OpenShift cluster. And then once this is done, I can actually start remote dev. And so now I've got my entire system deployed out into OpenShift, and I'm doing local development here, and any changes I make get automatically pushed back to the cluster. So now I don't even need Docker or Docker Compose or anything on my local machine. And this would actually work on my other laptop if I wanted to. Like literally it's doing nothing other than serving my video feed, and the fans, I feel like it's going to lift off into outer space.
Nice.
You're probably seeing on the screen, I've got one extra change here. So the Mac M1, I had to up the Red Panda version for dev services of Kafka because the one that ships with Quarkus 2.3, the one that's referenced 21.5.5, doesn't have an ARM image. I'm running it on an M1, so I had to bump the version. All right, so the app is almost up. And so what's happening here out on OpenShift is this is running an S2I build.
Waiting in excitement.
Waiting in excitement. So the build just finished. Waiting for the next. Here it comes. The next version's coming up. I'm gonna have to make this a little smaller just so I can get the login here. So if you're not familiar with remote dev, it's essentially running dev mode, but in a remote environment. So when you see this thing come up, you'll notice that it says it's running in, the dev profile, profile dev activated, live coding activated. So now this app is actually running. It's still in the middle of the microservices environment of all my apps. I can come back to my superheroes here and, it's still working and whatnot. Right. Everything is still working, but now I can come back here and I can say W remote dev.
And it might just be important for people to say that in this case, you want that to only be scaled to one node.
Correct.
Otherwise, you'll have weird one of which node is going to reply to you.
Yeah. So just to kind of show what things I could do here, I don't want to actually make a change to the.
I knew this would quick.
Yeah.
So, you knew what?
So Antonio says you're running in dev mode, so you have access to the dev UI, right?
Not in remote mode, you don't.
No. So do we actually have anything now? I forgot what the status is of it. The Q/dev, right? Yeah. So, well, I'll answer to Antonio. So you don't have it. We've disabled. We have turned it off for security reasons because literally you can get access to all passwords and stuff. And if you're running in a cluster, whether it's Azure or OpenShift, you will be running on public endpoints. But it is something you want to fix, like literally being able to secure off parts of it. But yeah,
I'm trying to see why my endpoint isn't working here.
Because Antonio asked for dev mode, that's why.
Yeah, because Antonio totally messed me up, right?
Yeah,
that's what he does. Yeah, so I could make changes. So if I go back, I don't know why it's not. Come back to my fights. Get API fights. Hello. It should be there.
The demo effect?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why it's not working. Oh, crap. You know what happened?
No.
This is going to be funny. So the dev sandbox, right, is good for 30 days. Like when you sign up, I literally just hit my 30-day right now. So the environment is tearing down as we speak.
Wonderful.
Oh,
wonderful.
Literally, as we speak, my OpenShift environment is being torn down.
So I'm actually happy because it already happened to me, and so I don't feel so I don't feel alone anymore. Thank you, Eric. So
yeah, you can see it just died. Like I lost my connection to the OpenShift environment.
Oh man. You gotta be kidding me. That means that you started up last time
a month ago. A month ago today.
At the same hour that we planned this, which we didn't. Oh, okay, great.
That's fun. You can't make this stuff up, right? You just can't make it up.
You're literally 4 minutes away from it. Could just waited 10 minutes, you'd be fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what you do when you pay for free stuff.
Yeah. So I guess while this is doing, let me walk you through kind of how the automation works. So the repo itself is what I think is pretty well documented, but let me go back to the repo. So all through the README, it talks about the different apps and has links to the READMEs for all the individual apps, but it also talks about like, hey, how would I run this locally through Docker Compose? What are the commands based on the version I want to run? If I wanted to deploy it to Kubernetes, how would I do that? How would I? So with if you just go into like raw Kubernetes, you have to figure out the ingresses, because with an ingress, you need to know the host name, right? As part of the ingress CR resource, which obviously I can't know ahead of time when building all these static YAML files. So there might be like one thing you have to do, but with OpenShift, you don't have to, because you just have the root and you don't have to know what the, it just uses the cluster wildcard and it will automatically expose a root for you.
Cool.
How would I run it? How would I deploy it? How the monitoring works, and all that good stuff. From an automation perspective, like I'm going to just go to GitHub Action. So every time an action happens, there's this, the first thing it does is it does like a simple sanity check. So for both Java 11 and 17, just basically does may even verify, like as a simple, and this is what would happen in a pull request. And this only takes, a couple of minutes. But once that goes successfully, the next thing that runs is kind of two different sets of jobs, where both on the JVM and native, it'll actually run all the integration tests in the JVM as well as in native image. Then it'll build container images for them, both the JVM and the native, and then it'll run all the integration tests again through against the container image, and then it will push all the images up to Quay. So up on Quay, the bigger, for each app, there's a repo, and then all the images are there. So you can kind of see image size as well. So like Java 17, the image is 150 megs. Same with Java 11, but then in native, the image size is down into like the 30s. And then the last thing that happens when the once that job runs is it goes through and basically generates all the descriptors. So there's a couple scripts in this repo which generate all the Docker Compose and all the Kubernetes descriptors, right? And it just basically run for each app and for each version. So like for Minikube versus Knative versus OpenShift, runs like in a loop for each project and generates all the different descriptors. And all this stuff is checked into the repo. Like if you were to go, so under scripts, there's this, generate Kubernetes resources script, and it will go through. So basically for every project goes and generates all the different Kubernetes, and then it just in a bash script merges them all together and whatnot into one big happy YAML file. And that's about all she wrote. As far as future, like I mentioned, future enhancements, anybody wants to, so this lives in the Quarkus.io repo. There's a bunch of open enhancements. Anybody wants to take a stab at it, this is our plea for help from the community. If you want to start contributing. Any questions or anything else you want to see? I know we're right at the top of the hour.
No, it's great. Cool.
Something to keep in mind, this application will evolve over time to use the new features we integrate in Quarkus to ease some parts, especially around testing. There is a lot of things we can improve. So yeah, this is something that will evolve with the latest and greatest that we are cooking.
Excellent. So we'll have you back with later on in a few months with new features.
Yep. And the ownership of this falls onto your shoulders, Georgios, now. It's all
obviously.
yours. I'm going to heave it over the wall to you.
Cool. Cool. It sounds great. I'm sure Max agrees as well, although he can't. It seems like his sound is gone, or his mic is gone. Anyway, I think, yeah, we're at the top of the hour, so it's a good time to let everybody go. And thanks for joining, everybody, and we'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye bye.